I'm David Daneman, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book creators and supporters. It's September 11th, 2020. I'm John Swinimer. If you have a comment, criticism, or question, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with David Daneman. The podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. David attended the University of Kansas film program. After graduation, he worked on a few features and commercials before moving to South Korea. Then he learned how to teach. It was also during this time he began making comics. He combined a rotoscoping style with pantomime storytelling, and the incredibly bizarre comic strip, Daneman, was born. He later married and moved to Vancouver, British Columbia. While working for the Webtoon website, David attended Vancouver Community College's digital graphic design program. He now resides in Montreal. One of his current projects is a Kickstarter project called iMMigratitude. So without further ado, here's my chat with David Daneman.
So I'm here with David Daneman. Thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
You're welcome.
I appreciate your time. One of the first questions I usually ask is, what was the first comic book that you read? Do you remember what that might have been?
Yeah, no, I grew up reading comics in the newspaper. So when I was a young guy, this would be like 1985, I liked to read Calvin and Hobbes, The Far Side, and Garfield was between them. So as a young person, I really did like Garfield, but I feel that Calvin and The Far Side stand up better under scrutiny than Garfield, perhaps.
That's for sure. Yeah, lots of hidden stuff in there that we don't normally see first time out. Wondering who or what inspires you to create today?
Okay, that's an interesting question, and I'm not sure I understand it. Who or what inspires me to create?
Like, is there anyone you're reading, or like I know Bill Watterson was a great influence then, but is there anyone today that you might be reading or following, or just any type of art that inspires you today? Yeah,
well, I identify as a web cartoonist, which puts me in like the youngest generation of cartoonists out there. And there's a guy named John Cullen. He's Irish, and he has not only is he very talented, but he has an amazing work ethic. He's been doing a comic a day for over 3 years now. So his work ethic inspires me. Of all time, I would say the Perry Bible Fellowship is probably the most inspirational comic strip for, my type of folk.
Okay, cool. So I'm talking to you and others under the context of the Montreal Comic Arts Festival, which unfortunately didn't happen this year, which is a shame.
Well, it happened virtually.
Yes, that's true, but physically did not, so which is something we miss out on. So I'm wondering, what were you planning to showcase exhibiting at that particular event?
Well, so I was a cartoonist from 2005 until 2017. I'm on like an extended hiatus. After that point in time, I pivoted to being a publisher of cartoons. And so I had 3 anthologies, which I created. They're called Launch Party, Art Block, and Block Party. And I was planning on showing them at MCAF.
And those are available now for people to purchase? Sure,
we're running out. They're on Gumroad. If you look up David the Daneman on Gumroad, it's pretty easy to find. But yeah, there's under 100 left of all of them.
Okay, well I guess that's good news. You're selling out quickly. That's good. So I understand you have a new Kickstarter on the go, and I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about that one.
Sure. There's another guy here in Montreal named Alex Park, and he's a good friend of mine. And he also does anthologies. And we had been talking about teaming up together for a long time. And so that's what this is. The book is called iMMigratitude, and it is a collection of every single artist in it is themselves or the child of an immigrant. And they're all Asian because Alex, he immigrated from Korea when he was 11. He moved from Seoul to Vancouver. He and I had a bunch of things in common. We both lived in Vancouver and we both lived in Seoul. And we both love webcomics. So that's what we talked about most of the time. And we decided to team up on this book.
Cool. Who's actually involved in this? Can you talk a bit about the creators?
Sure. I can rattle off some names for you. Debbie Tong, who does Where's My Bubble, is in it. Andrew Dieppe, who does System 32 comics, is in it. Vince Cow, who does The Cow, is the name of his comic. Or Mondo Mango also is the name of his strip. And then there's also some folk not from the webcomics world. Alex has his taste extends beyond webcomics. So we've got Fumio Obata, who is he's an illustrator out of Glasgow, I believe, of Japanese descent. And Lily Van, she's an animator in Colorado, I believe, working on the TV show We Bear Bears is in it. Just a whole bunch of, there's 17 artists in it in all. And we launched today.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, it must take a lot of work to gather all these folks together and keep everything in line for one single project.
Sure, that seems to be my special talent, though.
And so far, so good. Yeah,
this is the fourth anthology that I've worked on, and I've got another one launching in about a month. Because of 2020 being the year that it is, I had to wait and see for a long time whether or not I was going to risk the Postal Service or not, and I made the decision that I have. We're going to do another Kickstarter here in October, and so hopefully things will be in good shape again by next spring when I'll start mailing things out.
Sounds good. I want to take a step back and maybe talk a bit about your creative process. If you could walk me through how you go from initial concept to the finished page.
Now, is this of an anthology or of a comic strip?
Let's talk about your own work.
Okay. Now, I was a very unusual comic artist. I still make one strip a month. It is for my patrons on Patreon. And my process there would be think up a joke, then I would storyboard it, and then here's the unusual part. I would photograph myself in order to create the artwork. I don't know if you've ever seen what I do, but it is a photographically based comic strip. So I'd photograph myself until I get all of the expressions and postures correct. Once I do that, I would bring it into Photoshop where I rotoscope it. Are you familiar with rotoscoping?
Lord of the Rings, Ralph Bakshi.
Of course, Ralph Bakshi. That's a pretty good example. A lot of people... Waking Life was the film that inspired me to explore rotoscoping. I would say a really good example would be the old Superman cartoons that Max Fleischer did. He actually invented rotoscoping. So I've adapted rotoscoping to comics, and I rotoscope all the guys and then lay it out in Photoshop and then publish it on social media.
Do you find webcomics traditionally have fewer panels than traditional comic book? Do you find that it's a limitation in trying to fit all that crammed into one tight space?
Well, there's a big argument about this. Originally, 2005, we weren't so limited. The internet was the infinite canvas that Scott McCloud talked of. And, on Blogspot, websites like this, maybe even DeviantArt, people would make very, very, very long comics. But social media has taken that away from us and forced us basically into 4 panels or less. These seem to be the things that work the best on social media. So I've asked artists how they feel about that, and the majority actually are kind of in favor of artistic restraint, that, forcing themselves to work in 4 panels or less makes them think harder, makes the joke tighter. So there's something to be said about that. For me, I wish we had the choice, but I'm old school, and I actually have struggled to adapt my comics to 4 panels or less. In fact, on Instagram, they have this slide capability which lets you have basically up to 10 panels, or if you draw really small, you could do 4 panels a slide, and you could have up to 40 panels on Instagram if you wanted to. So, does that satisfy your question?
Yeah, no, it's interesting because you mentioned at the top Bill Waterston. I know that's sort of up there as a pantheon of how you do the 4 panel. Or more, on the weekends he would do more, of course, but sometimes being very concise and tight actually helps get your story or your joke across more effectively.
Sure. Are you familiar with False Knees?
I've heard of that one, yes.
He was supposed to be an MCAF this year again, and he is sort of the Bill Watterson of webcomics. He takes a very painterly approach. He's a watercolors or gouache. He's a gouache kind of guy. He's very, very talented artistically, as Bill Watterson was as well. And so I would say Joshua Barkman, False Knees, is a good example of the Bill Watterson of webcomics.
Cool. Good.
He doesn't mind me saying that either.
All right. So you talked a bit about another anthology down the road. Is there anything else you can talk about right now? Is it still in the works?
Yeah, I can. My process with that is okay. So my first 3 anthologies were themeless. I didn't know what I was doing. I had to do a proof of concept first and learn a whole bunch about Kickstarter and what it's like to work with 25 different artists at once. So now, after having done this themeless trilogy, I've decided that every book going forward will have a theme. So I sent out an email with 5 proposed themes to all of my artists and asked them to rate them from least to most that they were interested in. And the concept that they were most interested in was love and relationships. So the next book is going to be an anthology of comics which are all about love and relationships. I don't know if that necessarily means pro. There's certainly going to be a lot of comics about heartbreak in there. And also, relationships can include friendship, so it does not necessarily have to be romantic love. Once I have a concept, I usually find a cover artist with whom I work pretty closely, and as we work through a cover design, because the cover design is a big part of the advertising campaign. Once I have a cover, I have to make sure that all of my artists stay in the loop. I send them a lot of PDFs, updating them on where we are in the project. Once I set a launch date, I have to make a whole bunch of ad assets, and I make sure that everybody has them. I keep everybody in the loop, and then we launch. That's the webcomic artists are. They're very useful. They kind of have an advertising nature about them. There's a thing about social media where it lends itself to advertising, I suppose. Yeah, if you were a cartoonist 50 years ago and you weren't in the newspaper, I don't know how you'd make any money.
Right. Yeah. Well, it sounds pretty easy to do, but I know that there's a lot of pain and heartache that goes into creating, especially a Kickstarter. So I wish you much luck in getting that one and certainly future projects across.
Thanks.
So where can people find out more about you online and your future projects?
Probably Instagram would be the easiest place to find me. It is The Daneman. Instagram.com/The Danemen. Not man, men, plural. That's Instagram. I'm also on Facebook, and I'm on Twitter. But I would say if you want to know what I'm up to, Instagram's the best place. And I mentioned earlier, I'm on Patreon. If anybody listening to this would like to give me some money, patreon.com/The Danemen. And I got a podcast, too, called the Podcomics Webcast, which is all about webcomics.
Oh, very good. So something for people to check out.
Yeah.
Cool. What do you usually talk about on that podcast?
The heart of that show is about how jokes are written. I take an artist and I like to look through. I started with this kind of assumption that all joke writers had kind of a list of jokes that they had not executed yet. And so we would look through these lists to find broken and stunted and unused ideas and laugh at them.
Okay. Any particular focus, favorites at all?
Well, the Jake Likes Onions episode is excellent. Most of the people I named in this, like False Knees and John Cullen, have been on it. If you like webcomics, there's a really good chance I've interviewed the person that you like most.
Cool. Good stuff. Well, David, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering if there's something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview.
I don't know if you're aware of this. I'm the Anglophone Community Outreach Coordinator for MCAF. I'm on the board of MCAF. I hope that we get together next year, but we're all going to have to wait and see, aren't we?
Thanks to David for the chat. You can discover more about David on Twitter and Instagram at The Danemen and online at daviddaneman.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts, and please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2020.